Hello and welcome back. Today we're going to be looking at the end of the Cold War. So when we're talking about the end of the Cold War, there's different points that we could look at seeing as the exact end of the Cold War. But when we had this, the end of the nuclear arms race with Reagan, that was really one of the big steps between Reagan and Mikhail Gorbachev. Mikhail Gorbachev, who was the leader of the Soviet Union at the time. We're also going to see the fall of the Berlin Wall, which really was a symbol of the Cold War, that division between East Germany and West Germany. So a lot of people are going to put it there. We're also going to see the breakup of the Soviet Union, which could also be the end of the Cold War. So those three things are kind of ways that we could see the end of the Cold War. We're going to be watching a couple of videos today on these.
25 years since the president of the Soviet Union resigned, leading to the end of the most powerful communist-leaning country in history. Although it stood as a major opposing force to the United States throughout the second half of the 20th century, the country's domestic struggles ultimately led to its downfall. So why exactly did the Soviet Union collapse? Well, the fall of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, or USSR, can be said to begin with its last leader, Mikhail Gorbachev. He was in power from 1985 to 1991 and implemented a large number of reforms to try and deal with the growing unrest countrywide. Gorbachev entered office following what was called the era of stagnation, generally considered to cover the mid-1960s to the mid-1980s. Although the causes of this stagnation varied, they were largely based on economic, social, and military issues instituted during the reign of Leonid Brezhnev and several subsequent leaders. Although different theories have been proposed, one suggests that the Soviet Union was desperate to outperform the United States in two major regions, military and spaceflight. This led to excessive spending, with the Soviet Union establishing a self-contained military-industrial complex at the expense of the economy, leading to underproduction and stagnation. Moreover, after decades of repressive communist rule, domestic attitudes towards the government were at an all-time low, leading to greater dissent and unrest. As the new leader, Gorbachev quickly set out to reverse this stagnation through two massive programs unlike Russia had ever seen before. The first was called Glasnost, effectively meaning transparency. The Communist Party had long banned books, operated a secret police force against dissent, and arrested citizens for political disagreements. But Glasnost ended all of these practices and even tacitly encouraged new freedoms. The policy also made an effort to reduce the Communist Party's hold on the entire government, allowing competitive multi-candidate elections to occur. The next stage was called perestroika, or restructuring. This was an effort to move away from the structured economy run entirely by the state, allowing for more private ownership of businesses and semi-free market access. These two new efforts completely shifted the focus of Soviet politics and economy and closely mirrored the Western ideals that had made other countries successful. Unfortunately, the major shift was unable to undo decades of state rule, and in the words of Gorbachev, the old system collapsed before the new one had time to begin working, and the crisis in the society became even more acute. In this interim period, the economy got considerably worse, as did standards of living for nearly all members of the Soviet Union and its satellite states. Slowly, these Eastern European satellite states began to hold free elections, mostly as a result of the Glasnost reform. The first to shift away was Poland, whose newly free elections instituted a non-communist party and ultimately independence. Soon, other satellite states saw their own peaceful transitions of power. Eventually, these efforts led to widespread unrest throughout the government, and in August of 1991, a group of hardline Communist Party members attempted a coup d'etat against Gorbachev, who they believed was steering the country into failure. The coup did not work, and Gorbachev resigned as head of the Communist Party, which had tried to overthrow him. It was ultimately dissolved entirely. In the midst of the coup, several Baltic states announced their independence, which triggered a domino effect over the next few months. By December of 1991, Ukraine, Russia, Belarus, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Moldova, Turkmenistan, Tajikistan, and Uzbekistan left the Soviet Union. They formed amongst themselves a new international commonwealth of independent states removed from the USSR. Within a few days, the now powerless USSR government, which technically only had power over Georgia, was dissolved by Gorbachev, ending 69 years of a world power. In the past 25 years, Russia has managed to somewhat recover its former glory, as the Russian Federation is the 13th largest economy in the world, boasting the second most powerful military. Although it is still lagging behind, Russia's resurgence as a global power is a testament to its influence before the fall of the Soviet Union. Russia has played a big role in many world conflicts, most recently the Syrian civil war. Its involvement marks the first time since the end of the Cold War that Russia has stepped outside of the former borders of the USSR militarily. Find out more about Russia's role in Syria in this.
And now we're going to be watching a short video showing you a little bit of the fall of the Berlin Wall. And so that last video kind of showed you some live footage from when the Berlin Wall was being taken down. What happened is that the gates had been opened. Basically, people tried to go through and the guards didn't stop them. And so people kind of came and went. And then people just started taking down the wall. And by taking it down, we mean they literally just started tearing it down and apart. And it was very symbolic as kind of a visual end of the Cold War. People could see that when they were taking down the Berlin Wall, that it was like the Cold War was ending. And we are going to see after this where West Germany and East Germany are reunited into Germany. It's important to note, too, when we're talking about the Cold War, when we're talking about the breakdown of those satellite nations, such as like Poland, that a lot of people are going to be kind of main people that help this happen. And one of those is going to actually be the Pope of the Roman Catholic Church. Will take a stand and will be one of the other leaders that is going to really push to see these ex-Soviet bloc countries, these Soviet countries, satellite nations, begin to have free and democratic elections again. So with the end of the Cold War, however we look at it, really when we talk about Ronald Reagan's presidency and the end of Ronald Reagan's presidency, this is going to be considered his legacy or the thing that people remember about Reagan's presidency. Even though if you want to look at the technical end of the Cold War with the breakup of all of those satellite nations, we're more in the George Bush years. When we think about Reagan, we think about the end of the Cold War. And, you know, Reagan's idea with Reaganomics and this spending all of this money on like the Star Wars system and doubling like our defense and spending all of this money, really Reagan's idea, one of his big kind of side ideas to end the Cold War was basically to outspend the Soviet Union. He kind of figured if he could spend, he knew they didn't have as much money, so he's like, if we can outspend them and make them go bankrupt and tank their economy, it will help end this Cold War. So just another thought when we're looking at Reagan. So question, this was in our first video that we watched. How did Glasnost and Petrushka contribute to the fall of the Soviet Union? These are those two programs that Gorbachev is going to try and put into place. So, A, they brought back the old communist order of complete control. Or B, they brought the outside world and different economic and political options to people. So how did Glasnost and Petrushka contribute to the fall of the Soviet Union? Next question. What was Reagan's idea to aid in the collapse of the Soviet Union? Was it to destabilize the Soviet bloc countries or to outspend the Soviet Union, causing them to go bankrupt? What was Reagan's thought on this whole thing? Now we're going to take this kind of a little bit different turn and talk a little bit about the culture of the 80s. In 1981, a new disease is going to hit the world, and this is going to be AIDS. AIDS is the acronym. What it stands for is Acquired Immunodeficiency Syndrome. AIDS is actually the last stage of HIV or the human immunodeficiency virus. AIDS is really going to take the stage in the 1980s. We're going to see the numbers of people who have AIDS and are dying from AIDS really go up in the 1980s. what's going to happen is that the government works very slow, and so we're going to start to see kind of the popular culture. We're going to see musicians and artists really take on the cause of AIDS and trying to find a cure for AIDS as the 1980s and in the 1990s go on. Just talking a little bit about music. Music in the 1980s began to change. We see a lot of different types of movements with this, and one of the biggest ones, and one of these ways it's going to really change the culture in the United States and the world, is what was called MTV. And the MTV that you know today, which has like a lot of reality TV shows, is not the MTV that started in the 1980s. In the 1980s, when you turned on MTV, it was all music videos. And so all of these artists now had to start making music videos, and it brought a new artistic impression to music, and it completely changed the way that music was done forever. And if you think about it, today you probably watch some of these maybe on YouTube, but it's transitioning again. But MTV really changed US culture. It really changed music. It was a whole new idea. Very influential in the 1980s, and it's going to slowly spread to all other different types of genres of music. But MTV, it's also going to take on topics later on as MTV continues to grow. They will be the first that really start kind of this reality show craze. So very influential in the United States. Another thing that happens in the 1980s is we begin to see the start of censorship. What's going to happen is Tipper Gore, she was the wife of Al Gore, who we're going to talk about a little bit when we get to Clinton, co-founded the Parents Music Resource Center with another woman. What had happened was that Tipper Gore had heard her 11-year-old daughter playing Darling Nikki by Prince and didn't think it was appropriate and didn't understand how she was able to get a hold of that music, how parents weren't being warned. And so what they're going to begin is the rating system that you guys have grown up with. So if you were to look when you are downloading music, or if you went out to buy a CD, or if you play video games and you see the little rating, or even when we watch TV now, it always has up in the corner when the TV show starts, it has, you know, maybe PG, PG-13, and then it has all the letters. That wasn't around before this censorship started. And so what is going to happen is we had a few ratings like on movies, but they didn't, I mean, it was like G, PG, R, and that was it. So what they're going to do is they are going to begin putting warning labels on for parents. And those labels are going to continue to evolve to where we see not just like PG or PG-13, but now we have the different letters that tell us what we're going to see if we watch this. Or with video games, the same thing. You might see like GV for graphic violence. So censorship, another big part of the 80s and the 90s. So question, what was seen as a symbol of the end of the Cold War? Was it A, the fall of the Berlin Wall, or B, Gorbachev stepping down? We're talking about this main symbol, this main idea, kind of a visual symbol of the end of the Cold War. Next question, what disease began to spread rapidly in the 1980s? A, smallpox, or B, AIDS? What disease really began to spread in the 1980s? Next question, in which area is Ronald Reagan's legacy usually considered the strongest? So this means when we're talking about Ronald Reagan and we're talking about when we think about Reagan, what is this idea that most people have? Like what was one of the biggest things he achieved during his presidency? Was it A, the ending of the Cold War, or B, illegal immigration? And that will be the end for today. Next time we'll be talking about the George Bush years.